If you're asking me, will my story be as accurate as possible, then of course it will. But are truth and falsity the proper criteria? I don't know. Maybe when the time comes, my first responsibility will be to tell the best possible narrative. Isn't that what history is? A kind of storytelling.
Is it?
Imposing a pattern on events that were mostly casual and haphazard, and shaping them into a narrative that is logical and interesting. Oh, yes, I think so.
And where does the truth come into all this?
I'm not sure that truth is a primary ingredient. Is that a shocking thing to say?
I think it's beyond question that Friel is at the very foreground of Western European theatre. I believe the canon of his work is more impressive than probably any other living playwright.
The opus, the collection of work, is quite extraordinary. Not just in terms of the Irish repertoire, but in terms of world repertoire.
Irish theatre was the classics from the Abbey in the 20s, and along comes this new kind of voice that seemed to speak to us. And I think it helped us understand ourselves in Irish America and the people that got us here.
In England, he's unknown, really, except as the name, and that only adds to his mystery. It's the Greta Garbo syndrome.
In refusing to do interviews, is he has, very effectively, whether that was the intention or not, he has added to his own myth.
Because he's shy, he seems to promote this kind of image of darkness. You know, I'm not saying he's not dark.
Well, I think that we certainly are a maimed people in this country. I mean, we're a maimed people to the extent that there was a language in use in this country, that language is gone. When we say we're trying to identify ourselves, I'm not quite saying that we're trying to define a national identity. That's a different kind of thing. When you talk about a national identity, I'm not quite sure what that means. But when we try to identify yourself, it means you've got to produce documents, you've got to produce sounds, you've got to produce images that are going to make you distinctive in some way. If there's sense of decline about how the country is, it's because we can't readily produce these identification marks.
Brian Friel lives in Donegal, near the border with Northern Ireland and the city of Derry. Derry and Donegal, the twin focal points of his life and work. Like every major artist, he is constantly reinventing himself, the work taking sharp shifts in direction that are often extremely challenging to his audiences.
Because Brian Friel has had enormous success with plays like Philadelphia, Here I Come, translations, Dancing at Lunasa, it's forgotten that when a lot of his plays were first performed, there was enormous hostility to them, because they are exceptionally threatening, not simply in terms of the themes that they're tackling, but in terms of the stagecraft that he's consistently and constantly developing, and that audiences may not be yet ready for particular plays when they are put on the stage for the first time. Brian I really respect because he's never been content to rest on his laurels. He's never ever been afraid of experimenting, and he's never been afraid of challenging his audience.
I find Brian Friel a magnificently elusive writer. It's partly because of the sheer range and variety of themes and topics he deals with. And I'm reminded of something Isaiah Berlin, the philosopher, once said. He said, writers are either hedgehogs or foxes. The hedgehog knows one big thing, and the fox knows many things. Brian Friel, to me, is much more the fox. It's very hard to pin down one driving central theme. He touches on so many different areas in all his work.
He was born in 1929 in the rural district of Culmore near Omagh, County Tyrone in Northern Ireland. An only boy with two sisters. His father was the local teacher, his mother the postmistress. It was a household filled with music. This was the foundation of the extraordinary use of music and dance in the theatre of Brian Friel.
It wasn't until I was 10 that we moved to Derry in 1939, when the world that our fathers knew began to break up. But for a young boy of 10, it wasn't such a bad year at all, apart from sweet rationing. There was, besides, the wonderful position of our new house, the last in a terrace and directly opposite the army barracks. From our drawing room window, I had an upper circle view of the whole drama of military life, of marching soldiers and tanks and artillery and bayonet practice, a splendid and continuous tattoo, and all put on just for my entertainment.
At the time, Derry was going through a wartime boom, but beneath the surface, there was always the deep tension of sectarianism. But there was an escape. That journey back to nearby Donegal in summertime. Certain writers, and Brian Friel is one of them, create an imagined world out of some real place that is precious to them. Think of Thomas Hardy and William Faulkner. Friel does this with his mother's native place in Donegal. He calls this imagined world Ballybeg. A place born out of memory and imagination. A place of haunting voices.
Drunk and dirty and sweaty they are. I want to dance, kid.
A place preserved forever in time.
Most Donegal people would love to live in Ballybeg because there is one extraordinary characteristic about this small Donegal town. In Brian's plays, it is always very good weather. In fact, it's almost Mediterranean weather, volcanic weather, because he does see it as a place of passion, and he does see it as a place of revelation, brilliant light.
I'd feel sure there is deliberation on Brian's part in going back to his Ballybeg. Talent is one thing, intellect another. And I think what he does is he puts his talent into the small town. He uses it. And he creates a world, this world of Ballybeg. He writes about the small community beautifully, but yet all the work is suffused with a sort of longing. It's a longing for something that's absent, or something that's lost. He could almost be saying there is no place more lonely than being in the midst of a close-knit family.
I think Friel himself is commuting between two kinds of reality. He himself is quoted as saying, "Perhaps I'm twins," meaning that there is within each of us another person with whom one's continuing a dialogue. And I think his personal background contributes a lot to the way in which his characters are either leaving home or arriving home.
I think I can recall when I first knew that I loved Derry. We were coming home from holidays. It was a rich August evening. We had just turned the last bend that concealed the town, and there, suddenly, it was. The docks, and the bridge, and the black plain of the river, and the trees, and the sleeping ships. And I can recall the flood of happy recognition, and joy, and love, and peace that suffused me. And this is a memory that I don't suspect, because that view of Derry, no matter how often I see it, sparks off the same reaction.
Friel was educated at St Columb's College in Derry. His idealism took him to St Patrick's College, Maynooth, to study for the priesthood. He was to say later that he gave up the study for the priesthood out of conflict with his belief in paganism. A deeply spiritual writer, his journey towards enlightenment has never been conventional. Following his father, he now trained as a teacher in St. Joseph's
When you're looking for fun, join Admiral Casino and feel the flutter.
College, Belfast. He began by writing short stories, which is significant because his later plays are filled with stories and storytellers. In 1954, he married Anne, who was also a teacher, and they settled in Derry, where he taught mathematics. He himself dates the start of his career as a playwright from the first production of The Enemy Within at the Abbey Theatre in 1962. His stories attracted the attention of a famous man of the theatre, Tyrone Guthrie.
Guthrie not only brought the art of the director to a very special place, but he also, in founding theatres around the world, he created opportunities and possibilities. One of those opportunities was to bring Brian to the Guthrie Theatre in Minneapolis, which he founded in 1963.
The first day he did rehearsals of Three Sisters, and he got the company all together, and he said, some of you have done Chekhov before, some of you never have. We'll read through the play very briefly today, and he said, when you go home tonight, if you have an opportunity, I want you to listen to Mozart. And when you have listened to Mozart, then you will come in with a proper mental attitude.
This was a hugely liberating experience. He came home, wrote Philadelphia, Here I Come, and changed the whole course of Irish drama.
Yes, I did like taking one play out of the context of the general work and saying this was a more important play or a less important play to me. I don't think the work can be measured in that kind of way. I mean, I prefer to look on it all as some kind of continuum. Of course, I was very fortunate with that play.
Of going to a profane, pagan, irreligious land of gross materialism? I am fully sensitive to this, sir. Where the devil himself holds sway. And where lust, abhorrent lust, is everywhere indulged in shamelessly.
What Friel did by putting the main character as two different people, the interior and the exterior, the private and the public, was so highly theatrical, and so the form was so different to anything we'd seen before, that it made a lot of people like myself, young people who were interested in theatre, suddenly become much more excited by the notion of Irish drama and what it could express.
There weren't any Irish writers writing to my age group. And so to get a play by a writer who used English in a way that spoke to my Irishness was something completely unexpected.
It's a play about leaving home and the impossibility of understanding, perhaps, what that means until you go. Because the emotion of it, which was swirling around in that play, that brilliant play.
Are you fully conscious of the consequence of your decision?
Was not a rhetorical emotion. It was not an essay on the consequences of emigration. It was about the emotional gut feeling that happens when you walk away from the home, maybe never to return.
Philadelphia, Here I Come is a memory play. While memory is about what has happened in the past, it is also about what might have happened, but never did.
We're walking home from a lake with our fishing rods across our shoulders. It's been raining all day long. It's now late evening, and we're both soaked to the skin.
You'd given me your hat and put your coat around my shoulder, because there'd been a shower of rain. You had the rod in your left hand. I can see the cork nibbled away from the butt of the rod. And maybe we'd been chatting.
But wait, there's something wrong here. I'm conscious of a dissonance, an unease. And what is it? Yes, I know what it is. There is no lake along that muddy road. And since there is no lake, my father and I never walked back from it in the rain. with our rods across our shoulders. The fact is a fiction.
In 1966, we went to New York, and I remember Brian Friel and Hilton Edwards, who was the director, they were on the plane with the cast going over. We came into New York, into the Helen Hayes Theatre. We gave a tremendous performance, and there was a wonderful reception at the end. And later that night, I remember walking after Brian Friel into Sardi's restaurant, and when we went inside the door, there was a burst of applause. And we both looked around to see who was the important person that was coming in. There was nobody there. The applause was for Brian Friel, a New York welcome to a new Broadway playwright.
In the 60s, working with some of Ireland's leading actors, he completed what he called an accidental quartet on the theme of love. During this period, he built a house in Muff, just a few miles from Derry in County Donegal. He and Anne now had 4 daughters and a son. It was an extremely difficult time for him artistically, and he made the first of those startling shifts in his writing which have surprised and sometimes confused his audiences. The 2 plays which emerged from this, The Monday Scheme in 1969 and The Gentle Island 2 years later, are different to everything that had gone before. They came out of Friel's profound anger at political corruption and sexual hypocrisy. Both plays failed at the box office.
Where are you going from it there?
I have no idea at all. I'm a bit lost at the moment and very confused.
I think Brian has never lacked courage, and that is why he can penetrate the human heart with the precision that he does do. In 1989, I directed a production of The Gentle Island. It was the first revival of the play, which had not been well received when it was first performed because it was way ahead of its time. It dealt with complex issues of sexuality and complex issues of Irish society.
In an essay that I was commissioning on Gentle Island, talked about the prominence in the play of a famous American Western of the 1950s called Shane. Shane is about an outsider, very bad guy played by Jack Palance, who comes in and threatens this local community. And it's fascinating, the mythology of the Western that's explored in the play, particularly since The Gentle Island, is also exploring the mythology of the west of Ireland.
I discover this now, looking back over the bulk of the work, that there are very often 2 characters. One who is a very extrovert, quick-talking, glib character, and another who is kind of morose and taciturn and less immodest, let's say. And in some way, I think perhaps those are reflect some aspect of myself and perhaps some aspect of a member of the minority living in the North.
On January the 30th, 1972, 13 civil rights marchers were shot dead in Derry by British soldiers. Friel was on that march. Like so many others, he threw himself on the ground to avoid the gunfire, an experience which he was later to describe as terrifying. Friel's response was to write The Freedom of the City.
The Freedom of the City, which of course played in England, I think at the Royal Court in 1973, and which took off from the events of Bloody Sunday, was a play that I suspect spoke even more directly to an Irish audience than it did to a London or English audience.
One man, one vote. That's what I want. One man, one vote.
The poor. The majority.
Civil rights for everybody. That's what I want.
Well, if that's not what it's all about, then it has nothing to do with us.
At the time, when I reviewed it in 73, I thought it was almost too close to reality. At that time, we were inundated with the actuality of that horrible, monstrous event. And it seemed to me that the facts spoke more clearly than the fiction.
Because you know your children are caught in the same morass. Because for the first time in your life, you grumbled.
The whole process of writing immediately out of the heat of the situation is such a dangerous process. And this is one of the things that disquiets me so much about writing, as I've done a few times about the situation in the North, that I feel very passionately about it, and in some way I don't trust my passion. If you're working in the arts, you're always astonished at a kind of response like that, because you always think that what you're being said is read by two friends and nobody else. And when you get the British Army moving into your agent's office and asking questions about your, ringing back to Belfast to ask questions about your, when you get threatening letters, you are really astonished.
Friel offered his next 3 plays to the Abbey Theatre in Dublin, a Dublin with its own protest marches.
Purposes today, we are marching to stop the destruction of Wood Quay.
One of these plays brought together the current campaign to preserve discoveries of the past and the internment of Republican prisoners in Northern Ireland.
What I remember best, I suppose, about the 70s is the visits in the summertime up to Donegal. First of all, to Brian's own house in Muff, just outside Derry. And then, but particularly, the summer visits to his house in Mulladuff. I associate those summers with the light coming in off the sea, with big windows, with a great freshness, with a sense of being in the Gaeltacht almost, in the old Dream Ireland. This lighthouse, I mean, a house full of sea light, full of conversation, full of energy, full of irony. It was a displaced and elsewhere. And Brian was at the centre of it as a focus and a stimulus.
What was happening, though I think we only noticed this in retrospect, is that while we all had individual friendships with him, what was slowly beginning to happen there was that we were beginning to consolidate those friendships almost into a kind of group consciousness.
What was germinating here was something utterly unexpected. Away from politics and public life, Brian Friel had made an extraordinary inner journey. The result was his first truly Chekhovian play, Aristocrats, and his visionary masterpiece, Faith Healer.
Faith Healer is an extraordinary play. It's a haunted play, and it's a haunting play. I boggle when I think of the courage, the tenacity that it must have taken to achieve that play.
Faith Healer. Faith healing. A craft without an apprenticeship. A ministry without responsibility. A vocation without a ministry.
I don't want a transference made from Francis Hardy to me living in Donegal or anything else like that.
But to the idea of being an artist, a writer.
I think when the possibility of being able to control or determine what you should do or what you must do is no longer in your hands and can no longer be summoned, I think in that case, death occurs. Maybe not necessarily physical death, but a spiritual death occurs.
Like many other great works, Faith Healer's first appearance had been greeted with incomprehension. It had opened at the Long Acre Theatre, New York in 1979 with James Mason. The production failed.
I hate to make it as simple as that we're not very sophisticated audiences, but I think that's basically it. The plays that work and have worked enormously successfully in the United States are his personal plays.
We did not have enough of a cumulative sense of how productive this man is and how brilliantly he changes pace from one play to the next. However, people weren't used to the kind of play where there are monologues. But this is one of Friel's great achievements. He has shown that it is possible for the word to do the work of action, the work of stage business, the work of scenery. The word alone can be there in its naked magnificence and absolutely bowl you over. Of course, you have to be a master of the word, but that is what he is.
You and I could list a whole series of words, for example, that have totally different connotations for English people than they have for us. Words like loyalty, treason, patriotism, republicanism, homeland. So that in fact there are words which we think we share and which we think we can communicate with, which in fact are barriers to communication, I think.
Friel addressed this question of language and Irish culture by starting a touring theatre company, Field Day, with the actor Stephen Rea. This was to dominate his life throughout the 80s. Field Day toured its productions across Ireland, a kind of cultural invasion, crossing and crisscrossing the border. Its directors held diverse political views and came from different backgrounds. Holding them together was the strong central presence of Brian Friel.
There is something slightly underground about it, and there's certainly something grapevine-ish about it, because we aren't sure what we're attempting and what we're doing, but we're absolutely certain about the intuitions that have brought us together.
It was interspersed. His poetry was interspersed. It was in some ways a self-conscious intervention into the political situation in the North at that time. I think we both shared some kind of political perspective on the thing and wanted to open up certain areas for discussion.
There was also, I think, both for him and for the rest of us, a sense that the conscience, one's conscience was somewhat eased by the belief, however guided or misguided the belief was, that you were actually trying to do something about the mess of Northern Ireland.
I think when we look back on this extraordinary efflorescence of Irish theatre writing, and it has been, and Friel is at its centre, I think Translations will be seen to be one of the great plays of the Irish 20th century theatre.
That play has all the greatest love scenes ever written. When I took the great Australian director, Bruce Beresford, to the Donmar warehouse in London, he said, "This is the greatest love scene I've ever seen," about the love scene there. And I think he's absolutely right. That is right there with Romeo and Juliet and Cyrano de Bergerac and the great love scene.
Anywhere at all, always, always.
Always. What is that word, always?
The audience was extraordinary. As a visitor from London, you mingled with all denominations. You met John Hume. You turned around, there was Seamus Heaney. And it was instantly and obviously, the most important Irish play for years and years.
It had a huge impact doing that play in that building. The things that we were discussing, the resonance that it had inside that imperial building.
Everyone was frisked on their way into the Guildhall, which was surrounded by barbed wire. The whole place was fenced off.
There was this huge external pressure, but inside the building, it was just joy. I mean, people were just having this wonderful time. The whole thing was more than just theatre. It was the cultural event of the city was going on inside that building.
Friel now produced an English version of Chekhov's Three Sisters for Field Day, so that Irish actors should have a European classic in their own voice.
I think that Friel's obvious affection for the Russian writers goes beyond just curiosity. He has referred to Chekhov as charting those unknown areas where so much of our lives are lived.
In a way, most of modern theatre derives from two fountainheads, either Ibsen or Chekhov. But Ibsen, being a political playwright, essentially a social playwright predominantly, to me is finally less humanly important than Chekhov, who addresses the ultimate basic human realities. And that's what Friel does too.
of the big problems, particularly if you're involved in theatre, and particularly now because of Field Day, there is a conflict between creating the work, which means indeed the suppression of the personality. And this is one of the essential things for any artist. So that I'm caught in a situation where I'm trying to protect myself and protect my work on one level, and at the same time trying to keep this enterprise of Field Day vibrant. I don't know whether I'll be able to do these two things. Maybe one will have to go.
It was a time when he was deeply involved with questions of language and national identity, one reason why he was drawn to the great Russian masters. By drawing upon British theatre and bringing its productions to London, Field Day helped to create an axis between Irish and British theatre. Making History was to be his final production with Field Day.
Will you look at that man? What are you so miserable about? Think of this as an act of pietas. Ireland is reduced as it has never been reduced before. We are talking about a colonized people on the brink of extinction. This is no time for a critical assessment of your ploys and your disgraces and your betrayals. That is the stuff of another history for another time. Now is the time for a hero. Now is the time for a heroic literature.
This is silly talk. We can't, Agnes.
Once again, Friel was to offer something unexpected, a play about magic rising out of ordinary life. He returned to his source, to the world of his mother's people in Donegal.
I've £5 saved. I'll take it. I'll take it.
The seed of the play is in the story of two of Friel's aunts, whose lives ended tragically in London.
When I cast my mind back to that summer of 1936, different kinds of memories offer themselves to me. We got our first wireless set that summer. Well, a sort of a set, and it obsessed us. We called it Lu, after the old pagan god of the harvest, and his festival was Lunasa, a time of music and dance. Then my mother's brother, my Uncle Jack, came home from Africa for the first time in 25 years. He was the oldest of the family and the only boy.
The play of the decade, Dancing at Lunasa.
I think Dancing at Lunasa is a magnificent play, a wonderful pagan play about the primitive urges that lie within a very religious and organised society.
The women in Dancing at Lunasa are inordinately lonely people, and I think Brian has got an innate understanding and sympathy for human loneliness. They're human beings, these women, and that's what he finds so magnificent and so moving about them. I think it was Tolkien who said once about the character of Beowulf, he is a man, that is tragedy enough.
I always feel as women have dreadfully hard lives and struggling and are heartbroken by men, but they live on. They're courageous women. I mean, all those women in Dancing at Lunasa, I mean, they're heartbreaking if you look at them individually. And there's not one of them have had a really, really satisfying life. None of them broke out. Chrissy had a baby. She was very lucky in 1936 to be allowed to keep her baby. But that again showed the bond between the women.
How drunk and dirty and sweaty they are. I want to dance, Kate. It's the festival of Lunasa. I want to dance.
His plays have been plays about longing, about yearning, about the need for fulfillment, that longing for union with something else, with something beyond yourself. You can say the 5 women in Lunasa don't have sex as part of their lives, but it's only that their lives are very impoverished in all sorts of ways.
Opening night in New York for an award-winning Irish...
Oh, what a magnificent play. It's flowing. Sensitive, gentle, and beautifully staged work. It's tender
featuring as thrilling an ensemble of actors as have ever brightened a Broadway stage.
Frank Rich said this is what theatre was meant to do. The next day there was a line at the box office from 9:30 in the morning, all day long.
Friel had a way of tapping into the lifeblood of a family and a community in a manner that transcended words.
Don't miss Dancing at Lunasa if you care at all about the English language, about world theater, or about the human heart.
And the American Theater Wing's Tony Award goes to Dancing at Lunasa. Author Brian Friel, producers Joel Pearson, Bill Kirkwood, Joseph Harris.
We all work on wonderful pieces that, for one reason or another, have local success, but don't capture a kind of universal imagination. And Lunasa is one of those very rare plays that did that.
I want to thank Brian Friel, our great playwright, who cannot be here tonight because, you know, the song says it's a long way to Tipperary, but believe you me, it's longer to Donegal. And like a good wine, he doesn't travel too well, you know?
An intensely private man, Friel needs his sustaining privacies. This is the source of the meditative, interior quality of the work, the visionary journey which gives the work its depth.
He's seen as a man of mystery. I mean, I have never, to my recollection, read an interview with Brian Friel in a British newspaper, or not for a very long time. Now, I personally respect that, because I think if you look at the very best writers, and I would class in that respect with people like Samuel Beckett or Harold Pinter, they do not put themselves about all the time.
That sort of watermark that keeps coming through both his life and his writing, the relationship between something that's intensely private and is also intensely public. And it's in a sense curious to look at that kind of ratio between the privacy and the publicity. I think somewhere in there, you know, is the dynamic that makes Friel the kind of writer he is. Wanting to wince away and at the same time wanting to come out and represent publicly.
He is represented as a public figure by his plays. As a private man, I haven't a clue, and I wouldn't be presumptuous to go into it. As a social man, he's a man who likes a drink, a few drinks. Like myself, we've shared those few drinks on numerous occasions. He sings. He has a remarkable repertoire of songs. And one night, he even goes so far as to take down the guitar. And you could have knocked me over with the plectrum.
I'll tell you a short north-south story of a Dublin man who goes into a huge cavernous off-licence store in Belfast and buys a bottle of wine. And he said to the lady behind the counter, "How much do I owe you for this?" And she says, "What's that, son?" He said, "How much do I owe you for the bottle of wine?" "Oh," she says, "that'll be £10.66. And he said, "Sorry?" £10.66, she said. "Ah," he said, "the bottle of Hastings." And she said, "I'm new here, son, but I'll ask the boss. Willie, have you a bottle of Hastings?" I'm not suggesting for a moment that part of our problem has to do with accents, but I do suggest that it may have to do with imperfect acoustics.
Following another Russian adaptation, he wrote 3 very demanding plays. But there had always been this line of austere, angular writing in Friel, side by side with the accessible and the popular.
There's no doubt that when Wonderful Tennessee came out, it was looked on as somehow the successor to Dancing at Lunacy. It was hard for audiences because of the expectations that had been built up, if you like, to see what was there rather than what they had wanted to be there. It's beginning to be seen now as being what it is, a play in its own right, which goes to some very extraordinary themes, which you can locate in other of Brian's works, early plays, but which stands quite exceptionally alone as a play obsessed with the spirit.
The extraordinarily underestimated Wonderful Tennessee, where every one of the characters is appallingly frustrated and isolated, and the whole thing is summed up by the brother who is dying of throat cancer and never speaks, can only express himself through music. And it's another insight into total emotional castration of the male.
Thank you very much.
Well, I think Tennessee is one of the very, very rare plays of Brian Friel's that, even to my mind, devoted as I am, does not work at all.
The Broadway production of Wonderful Tennessee closed after 9 performances. With characteristic courage, Friel now went even further. He returned to the interlocking monologues of Faith Healer with his next play, Molly Sweeney. And he decided to direct it himself.
Because Molly Sweeney was monologues, I think it was probably a good one for him to do, because he dealt with one actor and himself, and one actor and himself. I remember saying to Brian halfway through the first week, what am I going to do about the blindness? Can we discuss the blindness? And he said, well, what will we discuss? I said, well, you know, what will we do? Thinking, here's my director, I'm an actress, and I'm going to talk about the blindness. And he said, well, I've written the script, and you're the actress, so will you act blind? He allows you to do your job, expects you to do your job.
When I was artistic director of the Abbey, and Brian came to me with Give Me Your Answer Do, and he said, but I want to direct this play myself. I said, well, you know, are you sure about that? And we had this conversation. But he said, no, I want to do this. And I said, fair enough. Because, you know, at the end of the day, Brian has sat in more rehearsal rooms than I have.
It's very rare that a good writer is also a good director of his own plays. It just doesn't work like that. If you take a play like Give Me Your Answer Do, it was a very messy, rather disappointing production in Dublin by Brian Friel, and was knocked into quite considerable shape by the direction in London by Robin Lefebvre. The actual shape of the play was better, and it was a much tighter, tauter evening in the theatre. I don't think on the evidence that he's a natural director, although I can see that he feels very strongly.
He thought of writing a play about Wittgenstein's visits to Ireland. Instead, he wrote a play filled with the questioning spirit of uncertainty of the dead philosopher.
I think Give Me Your Answer Do in many ways explores with a certain type of violence the love theme that we saw, for example, in Crystal and Fox way back in the 1960s. He's returning, I think, in many ways to that territory.
I love Give Me Your Answer Do because I think it is his most revealing play about himself and about the nature of the writer's existence. It's about the writer always feeling awkward, diffident, a slightly displaced person. And there's a speech somewhere in the play where the writer's wife, Daisy, says to her husband, she says, I'm paraphrasing, she says, either you're immersed in your world of fiction and you're not at ease there, or you're in the world of social relationships and you're not at ease there. Wherever you are a kind of exile. And I feel that's a very personal statement by Friel.
In fact, my 70th birthday was last January. And for the past 10 months, I've been scrabbling around looking for, could I find any words of enthusiasm or celebration to talk about the occasion, but it's very difficult. Even the scriptures aren't supportive at this time. The Psalms say quite bluntly, the days of our years are 70. And in case you might harbour some sneaky or timid ambition beyond that span, the psalmist then adds, and if by reason of strength that may be 80 years, that strength results only in labour and sorrow, and is soon cut off and we fly away. In other words, what he's saying is, go for the extra 10 and you'll be miserable.
It's always a bit disquieting to see yourself on film. And it's even more uneasy when you're in your 70s, because the word memorial keeps hovering around. But what keeps that ghost at bay in this film, and what gives the heart such a lift, is the generosity of so many fellow writers. What critics have to say can of course be flattering, but critics are of the moment. And it is the testimony of your peers that the work of over 40 years has some value for them. That is what is assuring. And as importantly, it is that testimony that gives you confidence to start trying again. So I hope to try again. So even in my old age, I would hope to try again and again, because I know that what has been done isn't at all adequate and nowhere near complete. More has to be attempted, and even though that aspiration may never be more than an aspiration, it is a possibility full of joy, a joyous aspiration. As Yeats has said, all things fall and are built again, and those that build them again are gay.